go. I'm live. G'day, guys and girls. Welcome to Sunday night Australian Aquarist, possibly whiskey, not water, live stream. Thank you again for turning up. Hey, Gabs. Hey, Praddy. And hey, Gil. Praddy, by the way, Valonia, you're in luck, mate. It's a really, really pretty algae, and there's a really big version of it, which I'd love to have for one of my nano macro algae tanks. Tonight we've got a little bit of a topic which is based around that good old Dr. Seuss children's book, A Fish Out of Water, starring, I think it was Otto the goldfish, and me reflecting a little bit in part on some recent catches of my own saltwater, but also some conversations lying around lungfish and the Saratoga that I've got, and just thinking about the role that we take as consumers, but also the responsibility that fish stores have in potentially offering certain species for sale. If you're new to the live stream, don't forget that, and you're watching this on rerun on YouTube, that you can ask questions if you can't be involved, but do so in the comments section down below on YouTube, and I'll address those comments in next Sunday night's live stream. And so before we get stuck into our A Fish Out of Water, I'll address some of the questions that we've had in the meantime. So some of them are really easy. Some of them are a little bit trickier. A real easy one is from Austin Val 222, who asks about using acrylic instead of glass in plywood aquarium builds. And Austin, man, I have absolutely zero experience with acrylic. And I know what you were saying in regards to bolting the acrylic to the rear plywood wall. And I know what you're saying about using the acrylic sunken down in that valley that I do from the recessed timber and the cover metal or aluminium fascia board. My main concern is that acrylic won't adhere, or I should say silicon won't adhere to acrylic. So if you look at all the American style plywood builds, they build the box, they have a recessed ledge on the inside, they run an a silicon bead all around that, and then the acrylic or glass goes on the inside, and the silicon acts more like a gasket because the silicon won't adhere to the acrylic. The water pressure is pushing that pane against that silicon gasket. And I guess that's exactly what would happen down in the recess down below in my style of plywood aquarium builds. But how it would work in that side wall to the rear wall junction, and I also rely heavily on the stainless steel angle top frame and corner strips for bracing. I just can't really give you any reassurance there. So I don't know why you'd want to use acrylic, because quite frankly, it scratches to all buggery. It scratches so easily. So my recommendation would be to use glass. I know acrylic, you can drill it, and I know that you can cut it quite easily, but hit me up with some questions if you've got concerns about using glass, but that's all I can really offer you. The next I had was from Reefing Gravy 7612 and Mabayu Q, who was comparing my plunger. You might have seen my new video out where I have the mechanical plunger with the dildo machine up above it, Gil, and compared it to a Tunzi wave box and suggested that really the Tunzi wave box will be a lot simpler. By the way, everybody, whiskey, not water. What are we drinking tonight? Tonight I'm drinking Jameson's because I'm feeling a little bit in need of some refreshment. I've been underwater all day, or all morning, I should say, chasing dart gobies. But anyhow, back to the story. I did experiment with some Tunzi wave box DIYs in my macro algae peninsula tank. And what I can say about that is that they're effective, but they're really, really affected by the symmetry of the aquascaping. And in a DIY sense, I was using some Jabal, those round Jabal wave makers. It's it can be very hard to fine tune them. So between the fine tuning, this is not the Tunzi, this is a DIY version, and a non-symmetrical aquascape, it was harder to get a decent sort of standing wave. And not that I was looking for a standing wave. The mechanical plunger is by far a lot more vigorous, and from what I'm finding, especially with my island in the middle, it is unobstructed. The effect of the swell, we'll call it, is unobstructed by the mechanical plunger. It's really remarkable, the effect that you get. I have had a lot of people that have reached out and said that they're concerned about the seams of the aquarium and the stress that goes on the aquarium. I guess it's been related back to those Tunzi wave box days. One of the things I'd say about that is I could see, number one, if you had a rimless aquarium that was a minimal silicon kind of a style of setup, then I would, be concerned. I don't really recall people reporting that their tanks would blow apart from the Tunzi wave box days. It was always talked about, but I don't recall ever hearing reports of it happening. In regards to my tank, I'm pretty comfortable because I've got a one-piece. There go the dogs. I've got a one-piece welded aluminium frame on top that locks all those three glass panels and the back timber wall together, and it's the same in the base with that recess. And then coming down those two corners, or actually four corners, I've got those metal angles also silking and holding it in. So it's fairly, I'm not going to say fairly, it's tightly budged in. The only weak point would be where the two glass panels in the front meet as a butt end and the junction going down there. And that's where there could be a degree of stress. But I feel like most of the stress is going to be hitting those end walls. So I don't know. I'm all about living my life and not living in fear. So I'm just going to run with it and see what happens. Cal-YINSK. I do not know how to say that. Kalinska. Can I do a video on collecting natural seawater and doing big water changes? Yes, I can do a video on collecting natural seawater and doing big water changes, but I don't know if it would make particularly fascinating viewing because it's quite simple. I back up to the boat ramp at the Nambucca River with an IBC in the back of my van and a generator in the back as well. I jump out. I put a Ryobi sump pump connected to a blue pool hose down into the water, plug it in the generator and pump the water straight into my IBC. I do not filter it. I do it on a high tide or just before the high tide. And I come home and I pump it straight into the aquarium. One thing I would say is if anyone is going to be building big aquariums, and I'd even say anything around about probably even the 6 foot range, 6 foot, definitely an 8 foot and bigger, is to make it easy for yourself and plumb a drain. So that means if you've got a glass aquarium, drill a hole and a bulkhead to a ball valve and plumb that to a drain or the outside world if you can. It is so easy. If you don't, let's just put aside gravel vacuuming for a moment. But if you want to do a quick water change, to just open that ball valve and dump out all the water down to that level, and then you can just refill. And you make that ball valve where you have where it makes most sense for you. For me, it's 1,000 liters down. That's one IBC shuttle. But if you've got some sort of water station mixed up, then you might have a capacity of say 300 liters, and you've got a 600 liter 6x2x2 halfway down. Dump it all out, pump it back in. Make it easier for yourself, and that's the same with fresh water as well. Let me see who's in the chat here this evening because I've been gas bagging for too long. Let's see. We've got Pratty. We've got Steve. How you going there, buddy? He's got a great northern. Cheers, Steve. I'm getting fancy this evening. We've got Quade. How are you, mate? Parcel not arrived yet, but don't worry, I'm looking out for it. Shirt, new merch. You like that? No. Oh, that way. No, this part, that part there needs to come down. I wasn't happy with it. Dingo Dave, how are you, buddy? With lime, that's it. And Ross Dingle, how are you, mate? Cal YNSK. Thanks, man. Sorry, don't know why my username is like that. I think it auto-generated from YouTube. Fair enough. Cal, did you get my stuff about the water changing, mate? I could do a video on that. Maybe I should. But I feel like most of the hobby probably relies upon artificial salt, certainly in North America and Europe. And I'm not sure how relevant it would be. Paul's from Queensland. How you going, mate? Ross, how are you, mate? I've had some questions. Funnily enough, I had 2 phone calls this week in the space of 2 days about my mangrove jack. It was some hobbyists that were wondering how it's going and how it's faring in the community style aquarium. Has there been any aggression? How it's going in saltwater? And it was an interesting conversation. Both occurrences were with some great guys. They were very respectful of the fish. They wanted to do the right thing by the fish. And they also wanted to display a mangrove jack in a way, or multiple mangrove jacks in a way that was sympathetic to the way that you see them when you're diving, which is in large groups. In other words, not that solitary predator in a 5x2x2 with a bare bottom that snatches at pilchards when you throw them in. And I guess I haven't done an update on the mangrove jack, so I guess I'll give a bit of information about it so far. He's doing great. It started life as about a 4 centimetre fish in my care. Obviously, it was smaller than that at one stage. And there were some concerns with some of my friends that it would be eaten up by the finger mark snapper, but it did not. Now, it's grown up to be about somewhere between 10 and 15 centimeters. It's the same size as my blue line snapper. And as it's gotten to about this size, it's shown a lot less timidness. So initially when it was small, it would hide, it would come out, snatch the pellets in that classic, what I'm learning, mangrove jack way, and then dart back inside its hole, which basically exactly the way you hear fishermen talk about the way they take the baits and the lures. But as it's put some size on, it's become a very bold fish, and it's out and about all the time. I don't feed seafood, with the possible exception of if some of the moray eels don't take some of their squid and a bit floats off, some of the fish will obviously snap that up. But I've made a concerted effort to only regularly feed pellets, by the way. frenzyfishfeeds.com.au. Brilliant fish food, 10% off, Australian Aquarist. Sorry about the plug, had to do it. Really good fish food. And it's taken to, funnily enough, it's really taken up to the 9mm size pellet, which is the one that my 40 centimeter long finger mark snapper snatches up, as well as a couple of gropers. So it's got quite the mouth capacity. But it's shown no aggression whatsoever. It's shown no aggression to the same size blue line snapper that's with it. And it's shown no aggression to the cleanoras or the much, much smaller raccoon butterfly fish. I've since moved that fish out into Palau Reef, but there was not a single problem. And nor the domino damsels, and nor the tiny half-moon triggerfish. So far, it's fantastic. It's no different to any other fish in my care. Whether or not that changes as it grows bigger and bigger, I'm yet to see. This is my first experience with a mangrove jack, and this is the reason why I'm keeping it. I guess my word of recommendation would be to get them as small as you possibly can if you intend to go into a community, which I know is limiting if you're in Queensland. Questions about if the tank I've already done that. Questions about if the tank seams can withstand the motion stresses from the plunger. I've already discussed my one-piece metal all around the top and my metal angles on the corner locking it all together. So I feel like for the time being, yes, I'm going to live it dangerously. Sing a ding dong. Hola. Where's Ola from? Sing a ding dong. Let me know where Ola is from. Hola. Hola. That sounds Spanish. Ugly Man's Reefing, 1862. Hi, everyone. Aussie reefer of 30 years experience here. How are you, mate? You've seen some things which I'm sure would have changed over the years. That's really exciting. I used to go and shop at Cairns Marine back in the day when they were open to the public, and it was quite the eye-opener to walk in there on a Friday and see all the halibut and tusk fish in plastic jars and things, which is fine. Don't stress out about that. Paul's from Queensland. How are you? Dingo Dave, the puffer fish that I got from Benny's that died overnight. I'm trying to be tactful about this because it wasn't the fault of Benny by any means. And I've had some discussions personally with the wholesaler that sent it down. It was when I went up and got it from Benny's. He wanted to move it on because it was a large puffer. But the thing that struck me was just how skinny it was. And that was not a fault of Benny's whatsoever, because he received the fish and was feeding the fish. But it was extremely malnourished. It was basically a swimming skull, if you know what I mean. And although when I got back home, I acclimated it, did all my water tests, and made sure everything was fine. The next morning when I went out, it had passed away. So I didn't even make the night. I did have some discussions with Benny, and everything's fine. Everything's cool there. I also had some discussions with the wholesaler that supplied the fish wrongly to Benny. And I won't name that wholesaler, but needless to say, they suggested that they need to have some in-house conversations with their maintenance crew, I guess you'd call them, and just do some toolbox talks and stuff like that. So hopefully that kind of situation with a predator fish wouldn't happen again, because it does take a little bit of time to become a swimming skull, if you know what I mean. So that was a bit sad. All right, mate, Cal, yeah, so you know what I mean by that. That's fine about collecting seawater. Matt, his fish love frenzy fish food. What are your thoughts on the pellets once they go out of use by? They are very high in oil, fish oil and krill oil. So what my concern would be if they went out of use by date is that those oils could turn rancid, I guess, off. That's just from exposure to oxygen and bacteria. What I do is I always either reseal the bags, or what I've been doing lately is putting the bags into some containers themselves, primarily because I don't want rodents in the shed getting into them, which they had and eaten through the corner of the bag. And that's just excluding air. Obviously, air gets in every time you open and shut it. Ideally, if you can, buy smaller amounts and use it up in date. But if you had a quarter of a bag left over and it was out of date, as long as it smelt okay, because they're fairly fragrant, if you know what I mean. Like, you can open up a pack and walk past and my wife will go, "Ooh, what's that fishy? That's that fishy smell." If they smell just normal, I'd continue using it. If there's a funkiness to it, certainly don't use it. But in future, when you're ordering, stick to a size that you know you could go through in about, 3 months or something like that, would be my recommendation to you, mate. Dingo Dave, yes, it was very skinny. Yeah, it was. It was a real I was really upset by it because I felt like a fish such as I'm not going to use the word predator again, because even though neon tetra is a predator, but a robust, large, actively eating fish, such as a puffer, a trigger, groper, snapper, Oscar, peacock bass, whatever it might be, that they don't just lose weight within a matter of days. It does take weeks, I guess, to lose weight to that extent. Unless, of course, there's a parasitic infection. I did do a post-mortem. I couldn't find any worms. So that's why I just wanted to have a bit of a chat with the wholesalers, just to sort of let them know that this happened and maybe they just need to have a bit of internal reflection. I don't want it to sound bad, but because I know what business is like, but we are dealing with lives. It's gone past the 6 months. It still smells fine and was sealed well. Appreciate, mate. Don't want to waste it. I'd continue to use it, mate. I'd continue to use it, but maybe just if you're buying like a half kilo or 1 kilo bag, I don't know how many fish you're feeding there, but like I buy the big 1 kilo bags. Maybe just back off the size a little bit next time. I know it's more economical. The other thing you could do potentially, you could always send them an email. I might reach out and ask myself, but you could potentially buy larger volumes, like a 1 kilo lot, and then decant some into Ziploc bags and stick them in the freezer potentially, or a couple of Ziploc bags. I'll have to double check and make sure that that's fine. I'm assuming as long as no moisture gets inside those Ziploc bags, that you could store 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of those and then pull them out as you need them. That might be one other way of doing it. I will double check about that. And of course, if you've got one of those vacuum seal machines, that's another way you could do, just to seal smaller parcels until you need them. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Pratty, about the puffin, mate. All right, so let's jump on to tonight's topic of conversation, because I've been doing some fish collecting, and some of the fish I've been collecting have been tiny, and some of the fish I've been collecting have been, well, they're still small, but are going to grow quite big. So I am about to release a video on me going back twice to collect a groper, a purple groper, purple rock cod. I'd call it a medium-sized groper. It's one that's got its record going out to 3 foot in length. I've spoken to a few people who have kept them, and the suggestion is they reach that 1/2 meter size before they slow down massively to the point where you wouldn't see them reach that size in your life. A bit like Gab, you were talking about the lungfish. And this certainly wasn't an impulse collection, because I see these juvenile purple rock cods, because they're really pretty when they're small. They're about that big. They're a violet color with a bright yellow tail, and they're really pretty. And I've ignored them because I know that they're a potentially large growing fish. And the reason I went back twice and finally collected one is because I made a decision that my Seaway aquarium and the fish that are in it, the jack, the finger mark, the big surgeons, and the smaller fish, will be going outside to my 4,000 litre, 12 foot long, what was my turtle aquarium. My turtles are in a pond over there. And I thought to myself, well, this might open me up to having a couple of other potentially larger growing species. So it wasn't an impulse collection, but it made me start thinking about other fish and inverts in the hobby, both freshwater and saltwater. And if there are some species there, and I've got 2 in my mind particularly, which are freshwater, which I honestly feel like the retail aquarium store is at blame for offering these fish for sale because they really are an impulse purchase. Now, before I get stuck into those two fish and local fish stores, one thing I'll say here is I do feel like the saltwater side of the hobby has got it figured out a bit more than the freshwater side. Let me explain. The saltwater guys, if you think go in the average aquarium store, yes, saltwater fish are generally or almost always larger than freshwater fish. And many saltwater fish look a bit clunky, for want of a better term, swimming around those 4 foot or 5 foot or 6 foot saltwater reef tanks. And I'm really meaning things like surgeonfish and tangs here, angelfish. But their lives aren't going to be compromised. So offering those fish for sale, I think, is fine. What I mean that they've done it slightly better is that when it comes to inverts in the saltwater hobby, and I'm talking about things such as non-photosynthetic coral, crinoids, which are basket stars or feather stars, sea cucumbers, for example. It's very rare to see those just sitting in your average saltwater aquarium store, just ready for purchase. Sometimes you'll come across a non-photosynthetic coral, a Nephthia. Sometimes you'll come across a sea cucumber, but not very often. And from my experience, the saltwater retailers are particularly good at really talking on the requirements of those filter feeding invertebrates, ones that aren't going to be able to rely upon light. They're even particularly good at sorting out new hobbyists that can handle soft corals, LPS, and basic stony corals, and maybe discussing the benefits or the disadvantages of keeping some of the stony corals. I find there's a lot more dialogue there. When it comes to freshwater, I'd really love to know your thoughts on this, because it's really common to hear about the American hobby when it comes to freshwater. And, I think about mobs like predatory fins that are offering, the river monster style fish to the hobby. I hear a lot about, Ohio Fish Rescue, rescuing fish, I guess you want to call it that, from hobbyists that purchase Goliath tigerfish and pacu and red-tail catfish and shovel noses and whatnot, arapaimas, and try and find a bigger home for them. But we don't really reflect upon the aquarium store, the average aquarium store in Australia, all that much. And I think maybe we need to. And I think my thoughts come back to a couple of Australian native fish that seem to have flown under the radar, primarily for, I think, maybe 2 or 3 reasons. The first is they're readily available because they're aquacultured. They're aquacultured in big numbers for the fisheries, for the stocking, the dam stocking, I think the Southeast Queensland dam stocking, waterway stocking type industry. They're inexpensive because of that. And I don't know, they just seem to be easily purchased. And I would hazard a guess that most times retail aquarium stores that are selling them probably haven't had experience in keeping them. Whilst I take a little whiskey drink here, I want to know if you guys can guess primarily the 2 species I'm talking about. And put that down in the comment there, and then we can have a chat about what you think in terms of who's responsible, because there's one thing that irks me about the way they're sold. So cheers, start typing. Let's see how you go. What are the two fish that I'm thinking of that shouldn't be offered for sale over the counter in the aquarium store in Australia? Okay. Freddy 87. Anyone else? Actually, that's yeah. Okay, keep going. Freddy 87. When was the last time you went into a fish store that had barramundi? They wouldn't even try to make sure you have an appropriate tank. Okay, barra belong in the average tank. Murray cod, Toga and barra, goldfish and fighters. Daniel, sense of humour, mate. I like that. I'd say that's probably because of the poor genetics coming in from overseas and Asia. Goldfish, I'd probably recommend reaching out to some of the specialist importers. Fish Chicks comes to mind. Actually, for betters as well. Fish Chicks. I'm up in Brizzy. I'm sure she's still going. What do we got here? Dingo Dave, Dunna, Barra, Roomy. Don't say I'm seeing the southwest, but I don't want to walk down the freshwater aisle. I can't stand the dead fish sitting on the bottom of the tanks I used to visit. I won't shop there anymore. Okay. So the fish I'm talking about are barramundi and Murray cod, particularly. But I guess you could also throw Saratoga into that mix. And the retail stores I'm particularly... Why this irks me is because you will find barramundi and Murray cod in large chain pet stores. I'm not going to name their names, but I guess you know what I'm talking about. You will find them in dedicated aquarium stores, and you'll also find them really commonly in the mixed private pet store like the one I've got in Coffs Harbour, which sells your dog food, your puppies, your birds, as well as your fish. They're only like $20. And I hate to say it, but there is absolutely zero, from my experience and seeing what I see locally, discussion or dialogue around, let's use the barramundi, for example, how fast they're going to grow, how big they're going to grow, the size of the aquarium it's going to need. The same can be said about Murray cod, although from my experience, I haven't kept a Murray cod, but a friend has. They're not anywhere near as fast growing. But there isn't that dialogue that goes with it. They're a $20 fish or a $30 fish. And I guess the question I've got is how many or how often do you hear of people having adult Murray cod and adult barramundi in their tanks at home? I've had this discussion with my mate Lawson up at Caloundra, who I got my Saratoga from, and he keeps barramundi outside in a 10,000 litre aquaculture pond, as well as Saratoga. And he's certainly very experienced, more experienced with me when it comes to those larger native fish. And from what his reports are, is that the reason we don't hear it is because the fish they've basically died, or they've been released into someone's dam. Let me have a look here. Murray cod are boring. Saw a particular chain pushing fork-tail cats on new hobbyists. Better Muse, wow. There's a 2.5 foot growing long fish. May I ask what they roughly sell for? You mean the fork-tail cats, Praddy, or Vroomy, or you mean the Murray cod? And the barras and Murray cod I've seen are sitting around that $20 to $30 mark. And the reason why they're so cheap is because they're aquacultured. Interesting because, yeah, Praddy, both in pet store and Coffs. You know which one I'm talking about. It sounds like a dinosaur. As comparison, an archer fish will cost you $80 because archer fish are imported from Indonesia. I think it's Indonesia. Into the country, going through, I guess, aquarium industries, and therefore there's the markup process. And $80 for a little archer fish, when you're going to buy 2, 3, 4, 5, really weeds out something which is, I guess, a big topic, and that is it's the impulse buy. When a fish is within reach of someone that wants to have a predator, wants to have a big fish, and they can afford it, it's that impulse purchase which is going to mean that those barramundi are going to get snapped up, those muricot are going to get snapped up, and potentially things like the archer fish aren't going to be. $20. Wow, even cheaper. How you going, fried duck? Yay, the cod. Mangrove jacks. The thing with mangrove jacks that I find is that, excuse me, you do see them in aquarium stores, but they set you back about $300, which blows me away. And I think the biggest issue is, I don't know what you guys think, but I think it's the impulse buy. If someone wants to go into an aquarium store and they're specifically going in there to buy a barramundi, to me that means they've had thought about it. They've got intent, which must mean that they've also thought about where they're going to put it, which also must mean that they think about how big it's going to grow and what size tank it's going to go into. So in terms of your mangrove jack, that $300 price tag for a little 10 centimeter mangrove jack, it's going to weed out all those people most likely that are just walking through the pet store or the aquarium store and want an impulse buy a scary fish. It's really going to be someone that has intent to buy a mangrove jack. And I was talking to one of those guys, Kane up in Townsville, who's going to buy 3 mangrove jacks for his setup, and he has intent to spend $1,000 on 3 mangrove jacks. But a $20 barramundi is completely different. Someone can hand over $20 on it and bring that fish home for their 4-foot tank and go, oh yeah, worry about that later. So it's the impulse buy that's a worry. $300, yes, mate. But the trouble with Queensland, I shouldn't say the trouble, but the mangrove jack is a popular angling species in Queensland, and therefore it has size restrictions on it, and you can fish a mangrove jack in Queensland for your aquarium if you wish, but it needs to be 35 centimeters. And most people don't want to start life with a 35 centimeter mangrove jack. They want to start with a 10 centimeter or a 7 centimeter mangrove jack, hence the $300 price. Peacock bass for sale too often. Yeah, I feel like peacock bass probably are one that people have intent to purchase. And I'm about to get onto something about who's responsible for it. You might be able to get a suss out of where I'm going with this. Gab says most of the barra, probably other monster fish too, get to size that they jump out of the tank through the novice's glass lids and die on the floor. Yeah. And that is such the call when I hear about people with their silver arowanas that are reporting from the States. I listen to podcasts like KG Tropicals, Primetime Aquatics, and yeah, there's all talking about their silver arowana that might have been about that big, and then one day I jumped out on the floor, and it's sort of just accepted. So yeah, they probably have smashed through the lids and died on the floor. So I guess there's two things when it comes to who's responsible, or who should be held responsible, or who should have a bit more forethought about this process. And the second is, I don't even know what the second was. Isn't that embarrassing? Anyway, we'll stick with the first. Cheers. 2 shops I visited regularly here are very good at educating new hobbyists. Excellent. But at the end of the day, some people just buy what looks nice without doing their research. Yep. Have I seen Queensland groper for sale before? Cal. Yeah. Atlas Aquarium had 2 bumblebee gropers for sale out the back. And I think they're popular because you get those Florida style YouTubers, the young Nick Bingos and things with their bumblebee gropers. I'd like to think that Finn up there will do some discussion and some dialogue with people that want to buy a bumblebee groper. He's been pretty upstanding, at least in my experience so far. But yeah, I've seen those guys too. Praddy had a fish jump this week. What was your fish, mate? What it jumped? I think Gab says if they get to that size, I think half the time, sometimes the fish might have ammonia spikes and their canister filters are overrun. Biological control can't keep up. Peacock bass are the pinnacle for cichlid collectors. Okay. All right, so Gab says Adam's, oh, thanks, Gab. Adam's toga tank design is the prime example of preventing jumping. Yeah, look, I'm pretty happy with the way my sliding screens have turned out. I have had no, I was really paranoid about that toga that I got from Lawson launching itself out every time. Of course, I've got to slide the screen back to do some maintenance or pick up a bit of food or whatever, gravel vac. And every time the toga would swim into that open space, I'd be like, oh, slide the door back. But what I've found is that as long as you're steady with your movements and steady with what you're doing, they're not spooked. And I guess that's probably the reason why most freshwater fish get in the jumpy side is because they're spooked. The lights might go out suddenly. There might be a blip of power. There might be a predator, whatever it might be, a lightning storm, and they go for a jump. So I certainly wouldn't leave that screen door open when I go to bed at night time. But yeah, I'm really happy the way it turned out. And in a way, I kind of feel a little bit sad for those togas that are in a glass aquarium with the glass lids, because I feel like there's so much missing from what's above. I've seen him jump out and snatch crickets and cockroaches from the timbers that are jutting out of the water. He comes out of the water and grabs them and goes back down again. And that can't happen when you've got glass lids. So thanks, Gab. I appreciate that. Righto. So I honestly believe that within reason, hobbyists should have the ability to keep pretty much any of the commonly traded fish species. I really do. And that goes for certain fish species that are considered impossible to keep. Like my example would be my twin spot gobies. They're the saltwater gobies, which effectively starve to death in aquariums. And I'm doing a bit of a second generation experiment with them. I honestly believe that unless people try to keep certain hard to keep species, that the hobby won't progress. I'd love to know what you guys think about that. But of course, back in the day, cardinal fish were difficult. Discus were difficult. Ultimate angels are still challenging. People still have problems with copper band butterfly fish. So if we don't have access to these fish, then those people that are prepared to put the time and the resources and just sort of think a bit outside the box won't have the ability to try and unlock the secrets of them, I guess. And the same goes for invertebrates. So for saltwater, we're talking about crinoids, basket stars, non-photosynthetic corals. We're on the brink of having automatic frozen food dispensers. That's going to be an unlock for a lot of those filter feeding invertebrates. But where I think the responsibility lies, or the thought process should lie, is that maybe these species shouldn't be offered over the counter to the aquarist that just walks through the door. Maybe what we should try and do is have some system in play that makes people that want to keep those sorts of fish do their research, have intent, and then walk in the door and discuss those things with the aquarist, or the retailer, I should say. So what I'm basically trying to say to you is, for all those fish species, all those invert species that are considered to be difficult, all the ones that are considered to be ridiculously large and don't show any presence as a large individual or very minor presence in the hobby, maybe they should be an order in situation. Maybe it should be one whereby the hobbyist comes and says, oh, I really want to get a barramundi. Oh, I've got this great big 10,000 litre outdoor pond. It's a swim pond. It's got some glass windows, and I really want to stock it with some big barras. I feel like they should be allowed to do that. There goes my wife doing washing. Hang on.
Sorry.
Here comes my son. Go, Ned.
Just needs socks.
There she goes again. She's so limber. Look at her move. She's like a gazelle. She's so much prettier than you. Is it because I'm going spotty and bald, mate? Come on. But I feel like these things should be ordered in. I think it's ridiculous that a chain pet store should have these over the counter that appeals to, I'm going to say it, the bloody numbskull bogan fish keeper that goes, oh, I want to have a big predator. Let's get a barramundi. Or, oh, I like a pretty goby that's going to sift my sand. Let's grab one of those twin spots. Or look at that crinoid. It's all feathery and soft. Let's buy that and bring that home. And they all die, or they jump out of the tank, or they get old and name spikes, whatever it might be. I feel like that's I don't believe it's the responsibility of, oh, that sounds really bad because I'm one that does a lot of research. But I just feel like you can't put the responsibility on the consumer in this circumstance. Tell me if you think I'm off point with this. But I honestly feel like someone that gets into being a aquarium retailer must have empathy and a feeling of responsibility about the fish that they sell. And shit happens. We all know shit happens. I mean, I just said in the chat before, I was cleaning out my shed. There was a styrofoam box there with empty fish bags, which when I came back from Gallery Aquatica last Saturday, as in a week ago, and I found a bag of water, and I thought, oh, here's a bag of what was cold water to keep my cardinal fish cold for my macroalgae tank. Pulled up the bag. There's 4 cardinal fish in there, and they've been in there for a week. They're alive. They're acclimated. They're in the tank. They're A-OK. Absolutely unbelievable. That's my fault. Shit happens. But the aquarium stores, including the chain stores that are ordering barramundi in because they're cheap, Amari cod because they're cheap, and twin spot gobies because they sell, and sea apples because they're pretty and purple, they know what they're doing. They're doing it for a financial gain because they sell. And I feel like that's not okay. I feel like that's basically saying we don't really want to know what happens to these organisms as they leave our premises. We've got our money and that's it. They will still sell those animals if they have a conversation with the right people that want to come in and have a crack at some hard species or some species that are going to grow big. They will still sell them, but they'll have to organise the sale. They have to prepare the sale. They have to charge a bit more. But in that process, they'll weed out the people that are not as genuine with the intent in keeping those animals. What do you guys think? Time for a drink. Fry duck, yikes. If I ran... Okay, here we go. Hang on, I've got to go back. She's much... Okay, I know she's much prettier, but I should... If I was pretty, there would be an issue, wouldn't there? I like to run towards the roguishly handsome side of things, mate. Daniel Witcher, experience and experimentation does progress the hobby, but how do you weed out the, morons? That's what I mean. By special order. So we're not talking about the can of Coke in the fridge next to the checkout in Bunnings, because let's face it, I see a can of Coke, I'm thirsty, I want to buy it. There shouldn't be a barramundi in there. if I want a barramundi at Bunnings, I should go to the special order desk, if you know what I mean. If I was to go and get one myself from the wild, I think I'd do better, Pratty. Fish collecting, Steve, can you tell me what the reports are of barramundi in the Brisbane and the Gold Coast Seaway area? Because I've got a slight suspicion those reports of seeing barramundi down there aren't because they're coming down the coast naturally, if you know what I mean. I think they're being released. Steve, what do you know about that? Disclaimer, when you buy certain fish and inverts, people won't listen. I mean, use a copper band butterfly as an example. You can say, disclaimer, these things are going to lose weight dramatically. They won't necessarily eat your aptasia. They can't stand bullying. They're prone to lymphocystis, and they have a dismal survival rate where every one that you see in an aquarium may have had 2 or 3 die before it. But that's not going to stop people keeping copper band butterfly fish, because the trade in them is absolutely immense because they're beautiful fish. So it's intent and how intent someone is to place an order and have some process behind it, which I guess is what I'm hoping might come into play. It won't, but that's what I'd like to think. Senior Ding Dong says, if I ran a fish shop, I'd be out of business in a month because I'd refuse to sell fish to people unless I knew they would give me a good home. Yeah, and this is what I'm saying. So that you get people saying that they care for fish. I love my aquariums. I'm going to have a fish store. And then they keep things like barramundi in there. It is difficult being a pet store owner. And I've got a friend in Kos who stopped being a pet store owner. But I think there is ways to carve out a niche for yourself. And a classic, well, not a classic example, but an example I'll give you, which I've never been to, but someone here from Michigan area is familiar, is the Watercolors Gallery in Grand Rapids. Now, I do not know anything about their store. I've never been in there, but I've listened to their podcast. And it can be a bit cheesy at times, but it's got a great scientific aspect to it. They delve a lot into taxonomy, which I love, knowing a species, knowing the wild biotopes, all that sort of stuff. And a little example is they do the in-house quarantine of saltwater fish and freshwater fish. And they were having a bad success rate with mandarin fish. So for freshwater guys, you may have seen those mandarin dragonettes, which are often, the most classic one is that bright green with crazy contrasting colors on it, little goby type fish that hops around and eats small copepods and things and crustaceans in the tank. They're very hard to get feeding. They're usually harpooned when they're collected over in Indonesia, and they usually, the imported ones die. They were having a lot of issues getting them through quarantine and feeding them and getting them healthy, and so they stopped. They basically made a store decision that they're not going to sell mandarin fish. And mandarin fish is a giant seller in the hobby, and they basically just said, no, we don't ethically feel like we can do it. We can't do it properly ourselves yet, so we're not going to sell them. Pratty says maybe a license like reptiles. I hate the reptile license. I hate the reptile license. I feel like in New South Wales, it's just to grab at money. And I don't feel like it weeds out. I don't feel like it does anything for educating people at all. I don't feel like it allows New South Wales government to keep track of what reptiles are in the state. There's like 2 people manning it. I've renewed my licenses and heard nothing. I think that is just not effective. Aussie bass. Yeah. They're doable though. You know, a 1 foot long Aussie bass is doable, but a 3 foot barra or a 3 foot peacock bass. Perhaps retailers need to have a species specific data sheet. Fish collecting. Adam, there are 2 I've seen in the spit, panther and the normal large. Copper bands for me are easy, just it's where they come from. Yeah, we've discussed that before, mate. And we've also discussed the concept. For guys, everyone, Steve does a lot of collecting himself, and there is certainly benefits from collecting your own fish and getting them home in a very short period of time. They don't go through that starvation process, and their bodies don't tend to waste away inside internally, and they'll pick up eating very, very quickly. So copper bands can be easy, but I feel like it's the chain of custody that lets them down. So you've seen panther, yeah, but that's so cool. But what about the barramundi, the true barramundi? You've seen one of those. Okay, I've heard some stories about them being around the area. Mango jacks all sizes. Yep. About going broke as a shop is not to sell fish you can't recommend. As said above, about going broke as a shop is to not sell fish you can't recommend. Flagtail gropers. I love a flagtail groper. Cave Roomy says, I agree. The copper band I bought home was fat eating in store. I kept him in an acrylic box in the tank for 3 weeks. He got used to the tank mates and he's amazing. Yep. So copper band butterflies, I'll give you an example. So for freshwater guys, you probably know what a butterfly fish is. Let's think about something roughly the shape of a discus with a long snout that's used to probe into rocks and get worms and things out of it. It's that classic orange and white striped butterfly fish. It's very pretty, but it's very mild-mannered. A friend of mine, we'll call him King Neptune, against my recommendations, bought a copper band online, and it came from Aquarium Industries. No, from livefish.com.au, which meant it came from Aquarium Industries, which meant it was an imported copper band butterfly. He unboxed it, and it was, I think, either it was dead in the bag or it was dead within 5 minutes of being out of the bag. He then went to, I think it was the coral shop up in the Gold Coast, and got an Australian caught copper band butterfly fish. Now, he brought it home. It's doing fantastic, but he's dedicated. King Neptune, not only did he have it separated initially into a separate tank so he could feed it mussel every single day, either frozen mussel or live mussel, just to get it eating, because it wasn't taking things from the water column. It's a good sized butterfly. It's, about 10 centimeters long. He then trained it into a little cage feeder that only its beak could get into, moved it into his coral tank, and continued to battle the onslaught of phosphate elevations that came with all these extra feedings just to make sure it was sustained. And he's retired, so he can do this dedication every single day, 2-3 times a day. Copper bands that are imported, sent all across the Pacific to either Australia or Europe or America, they're destined for death. Absolutely destined for death. Where do fish wholesalers come into the discussion? So Gab's brought up an interesting point. Where do fish wholesalers come into the discussion? And I had a very similar discussion with Lyle Squire from Cairns Marine back in 2009, when I had a similar topic back in the day. It was on Reefing the Australian Way, RTAW. It was the forum page before Facebook. Because I would see things like basket stars, back in then it was some non-photosynthetic corals, Moorish idols, that kind of thing, come through the store. And he gave me a look around, and he gave me a personalized tour when he knew I was in there at the retail side doing some shopping, which I was. And two things. One, they send a lot of livestock overseas to public aquariums. So things like sea apples and basket stars and Moorish idols in a giant, oceanarium, that's a different story to putting one in a 6-foot tank or a 4-foot tank. And interestingly, at another, it was at Fragorama last year in talk that he gave, he spoke about how a bit like I said, if the species aren't available, then the people can't order them, work with them, and unlock their secrets, I guess. Now, I guess that might be different to someone that wholesales specifically for the retail and domestic side of things, i.e., they're targeting the small hobbyist. I think if they're possibly dealing and collecting in these kind of species, then, you know, I guess they know what they're doing and they're choosing income over the animal. Which is, I guess, Gab, part of the reason why I feel like there needs to be an order in process so that, for example, I'm still waiting on my 2 pairs of twin spot gobies, and my aquariums have been maturing. I've been adding some extra copepods and some macroalgae and things just to get it all stewing away for life for these twin spot gobies for the last 2 months. And being the 1st of March, I need to send Lyle Squire at Cairns Marine another email just to remind him that I'm, you know, keen for those twin spot gobies when he does those inshore collections, and he'll collect 2 pair for me. So what I'm doing there is we've worked out beforehand, we've specifically placed the order, there's intent, and he'll supply to order. And I feel like that is the way to go forward for wholesalers, collectors, and then the retailer. I can't see any reason why those fish need to sit there waiting for the impulse purchase to happen. And I feel like collecting to order, in the case of Australian collectors, obviously we're not talking about freshwater fish here, we're talking about saltwater fish, you know, I'm prepared to wait a few months to get the fish I want to work with. The wholesaler knows he's going to collect and get a sale. The retailer knows they're going to take make a purchase and then on sell them and make a sale. And I'm happy to get my fish. A different story when it comes to freshwater, I guess. I don't think the aquaculture guys care about the barramundi that they're releasing to Pet Barn. Has anyone bought from anything quarantine before? I haven't, mate. I haven't bought from anything quarantine. I do see his Facebook pages, and I think it's fantastic what he's doing. I wish my copper band would control my bubble tip anemones. If you want something that's going to eat your bubble tip anemones, I would recommend a raccoon butterfly fish, a threadfin butterfly fish, a vagabond butterfly fish, a Klein's butterfly fish, and a dusky butterfly fish, because I've been experimenting with corals and inverts, and all those love to eat bubble tips. There's 2 types of wholesalers, though, too. Yeah, I think we're spoilt when it comes. Let's talk about saltwater for a sec. We're spoilt in Australia because the time, the distance, and the degree of contact that we can have with the collector, so Cairns Marine, Monsoon, Giardini, whoever, it's pretty close. You know, as a consumer, either directly or via the retailer, it's pretty close. We can really have good communication with the collector. So we're pretty spoilt that way. And I can see that it would be a lot more difficult if you are an American or a European, probably not Asian as much, but American or a European hobbyist wanting to have those discussions with the retailer, the wholesaler, and then the collector. Obviously, it's not going to happen for the USA. But for Australia, back in our own backyard, I can't see why it can't happen, because we do have such good contact. When it comes to freshwater, yeah, we're really just dealing with the whims of bay fish and aquarium industries, aren't we? I I mean, you could even use a simple example like a silver shark, a barla shark. How big do they get? Anyone out there keep those guys? They're a foot-long shark, and they're offered all the time in pet barns and pet circles and those kind of things. And how many people who are buying those silver sharks are going to be having adult silver sharks, foot-long, swimming around in a school in their aquarium? Good night, Pratty. I'll catch you later, mate. I've seen leopard wrasse at the Gold Coast Seaway. Ross Dingle has 6 barlas. Ross, can you tell me about them in your tanks? What size tank you've got, how big they are, mate? Because that'd be really interesting. Quade, even in South Africa, there's no wholesaler on their doorstep for marine. No. 22-year-old silver shark. Holy crap. How big is that shark? Yeah, stingrays again. See, I feel like it comes down to price. Like if that can of Coke at Bunnings checkout cost, I don't know, $9, we wouldn't buy it because we know we can buy a can of Coke for $4.20 or whatever it is these days. Ridiculous. But because they're $4, we buy it. Stingrays are going to cost you multiple hundreds of dollars, a bit like the mangrove jack. So I do feel like that weeds out the impulse buy, and you get people that have put a bit of thought into it beforehand. 40-centimeter silver shark. Tell that to the pet barn people that are selling them as those little guys. You know what I mean? Oh. Holy crap. There you go. A 6-foot tank. Bugger ones are over 20 centimeters, probably 20 to 25 centimeters. Yeah, I'm guessing they grow pretty fast. Cal, Y9SK, what are your thoughts on obligate corallivores being sold, like the ornate butterfly? Mate, you're talking my language now. Silver dollars are the size of my head. Can silver dollars get that big? Obviously, I know Pacu can. Can silver dollars get that big? I always thought silver dollars would be hitting that kind of size. Not my head, but that kind of size. All right. I need to top up. Start talking in the chat there. I need to go and get one more of these. I know this is really bad form, but we're talking butterflies and corallivores. So just stay put. I won't take long. Hang on. Sorry about that. Right, that was only my first whiskey for the night. You know, it's Sunday night after all. I caught some lytail dartfish today, which I'm putting into my macroalgae peninsula tank, along with some cardinal fish. Looking very nice. And I've been working on my video for the groper. Excuse me. It's been a big day. Corallivores. Okay, so freshwater people, back to those butterfly fish. Think of a bit of a flattened fish like a silver dollar or a discus. Think about all those classic fish you'll see on a coral reef swimming around the coral with often yellow, white, and black. Butterfly fish. They're somewhat sensitive. They can be territorial. They tend to feed mostly on meaty foods that includes tiny invertebrates, often case worms and polychaetes, tube worms, feather dusters, and in some cases, polyps of coral and anemones. And there are some species that spend their life only eating coral polyps. And what really sucks is sometimes they're the best looking ones. Okay, 2 thoughts come to mind. My first thought is a lot of the butterfly fish that are available and aren't utilized, I guess, as a display in aquariums are misunderstood. So I'll just put that out of the way first. So I'm talking about your generalists, your threadfins, your raccoons, your clines, your dot and dash, your duskies, your vagabonds, your saddles, your double saddles. In my experience so far, and I've got about 11 in my aquarium with some coral, I'm experimenting, you need to treat them more like angelfish. They'll eat anemones and they'll eat some large pulp stonies, but they're a lot safer than what you think. But back to the ones that really only eat coral polyps. And I've listened to some really interesting podcasts. I've listened to, is it Matt Peterson, who used to work with Coral Magazine, I think, was working on keeping them, just keeping them. This is the thing, getting them to eat food in captivity, because unless you're going to rotate big heads of coral in, colonies of coral, and have them pick at that, then they basically starve to death. And so you try and train them onto alternative foods. And the big question then is their intestinal tract able to digest and assimilate the nutrients from those alternate foods? And the usual alternate food is rainfords. Oh, sing a ding dong. I need to ask about that because rainfords I quite like. Usually I've seen things like mastic, which I'm not familiar with, but I believe it's some sort of squishy stuff you mix with water and stick it on the glass or into a coral skeleton, and they pick at like a putty, like a nutritious putty. And there's a really interesting talk that, who did it? Anyway, but if you look up Rethinking Corallivores and you go onto YouTube, and it was a MACNA, MACNA, the Marine Aquarium Council of Northern America. There's a great talk and presentation about rethinking corallivores in the aquarium trade. I think we should have access to them. I don't think they should be offered for retail in aquarium stores. And there is one aquarium store in Brisbane that I know and I've been to, and I've seen Plebeius, which is that blue spot one. I've seen rainfords. I've seen, I can't think of this. I can't think of the species. Speculum, I think it is. It's the yellow with the black dot. And I've seen them offered for sale. You can buy them online. And when I questioned and asked about it, I was told, they're eating fine. They ate some mysis this morning. And then just like when you ask about purple queen antheus, can you feed them for me? And they don't eat. Oh, they're eating this morning. Yeah. So I don't believe they should just be put into the inventory as such. And back in the day, it was assorted butterfly fish, a bit like assorted angels in the freshwater hobby, except that these beautiful fish will starve to death, unlike the angels. So I don't believe that should be the case. But I believe that if who asked the question, was it Vroomy or... it was Cal, about obligate corallivores. Cal, I believe if you were wanting to work with some obligate corallivore butterfly fish, I believe that you should have the ability to talk to your responsible fish store, ask that they order in a pair or a single species or whatever you want to do specifically, so that you can work with it. And I believe that retailer should be in their right to talk to you about what you intend to do, what setup you have at home, what nutrition plans you have in place to get them eating, and work with you about that. And also to say, basically, I don't think you've thought this through enough. Here's some other things you could think about doing. Let's talk next week, or whatever it might be. I think that's the ideal situation. But I do believe that we need to be able to work with those species. Mike Quaid, mate, I'll catch you later. Okay, so seeing a ding dong, trying to far with rainfords. So rainfords is a butterfly which is Rainfordii. It's a pretty classic. It's a real big, chunky, round butterfly fish. It's beautiful. It's a real pastel yellow color with almost some pinky white or lavender or white bands across it. And it's quite conflicting because it's in some online spaces, it will say it's a corallivore. And in other online websites like Fishes of Australia, it'll say things like it's a generalist that eats a lot of algae in its diet. So I'd be curious to know, seeing Ding Dong, what the situation was. Do you think it starved, or was it bullied? Was it stressed out from other butterflies? Because I feel like that's a lot of the problem with butterflies. It's stress. They're just not a competitive fish. Ugly Man's Reefing says Antheus should not be available in the hobby, in my opinion. Wow. Okay, so Singing Ding Dong says lasted 4 months. So I had the did it die from starvation? Do you think it just wasn't getting enough nourishment? Or do you feel like it might have been disease? It just never fed enthusiastically. Yeah. So again, it's probably a case where the food that was being offered just wasn't natural enough to its requirements. Maybe it was coral polyps that was missing. Maybe it was a certain algae that Fishes of Australia talks about. But, if we don't try with these species, we don't unlock how to keep them. And for example, in the case of my twin spots, the only reason I'm doing my twin spot experiment is because I hate seeing them being offered online in retail stores. And I know they're going to go out and get killed, or they're going to die. So if there's a way that it can be achieved successfully, and then it can be shown that maybe people, including the retailers, will see that and go, okay, it's possible, but this is what the kind of situation you need to do. You've got to have mud, you've got to have copepods, you've got to have worms, you've got to have something which doesn't really resemble a reef tank, and then they can go from there. Antheus should not be available, in my opinion. Antheus are like the hummingbirds of the reef tank. They're those pink and orange and beautiful fish that live in aggregations. I'm not going to call them schools. And they have a really high metabolic demand. They have high requirement for nutrition, for exercise, and they usually peter out from aggression within the group. Mate, I feel like, I guess my opinion there is that they probably should be allowed in the hobby, but particularly species like Squam pinus, dispar, square block. But maybe we should be thinking them as being more of a pair or a trio fish, a bit like you can keep a pair of chromis. However, with Antheus, you can tell the sex. So you can buy a pair of square block Antheus or a trio of square block Antheus quite successfully. Whereas with things like blue-green chromis, it's not so easy until they're in spawning mode. So I think maybe it's just rethinking the way you keep Antheus and not trying to keep them like they're a schooling fish, because they're not. Okay. Ugly, I agree. See them diving, leave them alone. Even the males look, even though the males look amazing. Steve, are you talking about the rainfords, mate? Because I love those fish. I think the key with chromis, Antheus, cardinal fish, and let's face it, things like whitebait and any of those, herring and pilchards and okay, let's talk about freshwater fish. Probably hatchet fish, tetras, rasboras, is that they live in a life where they're predators, so they're not grazing algae, but they feed on tiny animals. They feed on tiny zooplankton or microcrustaceans in the water column or on the biofilms. And they're picking all day, either from a neon tetra from timber and leaf litter and whatnot, or infusoria through the water, or they're on a reef and they're grabbing at bits of zooplankton that's floating past. They're picking constantly, and they're tiny pieces. I think the best success, I've had my group of blue-green chromis for 6 years, I guess, and they're spawning pretty much all the time. I started with 10. I've now got 7. I had one age out last year, and the 2 before that died within the first year. So what I think is happening there is you get a certain proportion of males to females. The males will kill off the other males. I've got 3 males to 4 females currently. It was 3 to 5. I feel like that ratio is very important. Very hard to tell with chromis because they're not even they only show males during spawning behavior, whereas with Antheus you can see it. Feeding on what do you call those things? Automatic feeders, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I had one set up for 8 times a day. Tiny pellets, tiny amount, bit of sticky tape across the opening. So they're just getting tiny amounts of food, tiny sizes consistently during the day, and also an absolute shit ton of water movement. So that the busier they have to be, the less time they can spend thinking about bullying their counterparts, and the more time they have to spend keeping still and then finding those tiny bits of food that go whizzing past. I have thought about setting up an automatic food dispenser on my Carlson Surge device so that when it dispenses each hour into the barrel up there, it gets siphoned out and sucked down through the Surge device into the water and delivers these tiny parcels of food through all that foam and bubble. That's probably very natural. I think that's the issue with we're trying. The saltwater hobby, in my opinion, is young, and it's trying to mold the organisms and the creatures to our idea of a classic reef tank. But that's part of the issue, is that freshwater's gone way past that. We're talking about replicating nature. We've got biocopes. We've got concepts about blackwater aquariums and tannins and pH and acid and buffers and all sorts of stuff. Saltwater's still worrying about a mixed reef tank or a stony tank or how fluorescent the corals are. We're not talking about how to replicate a aquarium for planktivorous fish. But we'll get there. We'll get there. A bull shark. Barracuda. Marine has gotten easier, better, but still more to learn. Yeah. Ugly man's reefing. I feel like the marine hobby, I mean, I see it from Australia and I see it from America, obviously through social media. I feel like the Asian marine hobby can be great in terms of Japanese, but not so great in terms of maybe Chinese, because it's a bit big fish in small tank scenario. I see what the marine aquarium side's doing now, particularly with coral, and I relate it to my experiences back in the day with reptiles. When people realized that they could start to keep things successfully or have access to things, I shouldn't say things, animals, there became a collectoritis mentality. And you see that, we're talking about a Goni garden, a Zoa garden, an Acan garden. It's never called a Micromusa garden. And it's concentrating on the collector side of thing, getting one of each, Pokemon card kind of thing. Not so much about exploring the fact that this creature might come from a completely different environment. It's been touched on. I've heard people like Shane Danger talk about how he used to collect LPS down in 21-degree water or 20-degree water on the southern Great Barrier Reef. But are we starting to talk about any temperate reef tanks yet? Any subtropical reef tanks? I'm sure there are people starting to do it, but we're just not there yet. But it will. We'll get there. We'll get there. Night, Roomy. I'll catch you later, mate. Gold Coast Fishkeeper. I don't, if anyone agrees with this, but I don't think that queen angelfish from the Caribbean should be in a fish tank with fish from the Pacific. Just seems wrong. I don't think that's anything different from having a powder blue tang in a tank with Australian species. So I guess you need to think between what's a display versus what's, again, we're talking about what's authentic and biotope. So a biotope is a replication of a natural environment in an aquarium. And in a way, in Australia, on the coral side of things, we're keeping biotope accurate, or at least on the greater side of the Great Barrier Reef, because all our corals are Australian. But we have access to purple tags and queen angels and powder blue tags and that kind of thing. All right. You guys are going, I don't know what you guys are drinking tonight. Jesus. Joe Hanny 3495. Question for you, salties. Do you get the iridescent flashes on saltwater fish as you do in fresh? Joe Hanny 3495. I'll wait to hear what other people say there in terms of iridescent flashes. But one thing, yeah, I know what you mean there. So you think about something like a Congo tetra, which has those beautiful metallic sheens that go through it. And I think part of the reason why saltwater fish appeal to certain people is because the colors and the patterns are much more bold and they stand out. They're blocky, they're matte, they're not iridescent, they're not that sheen. But one thing I will say in terms of saltwater is that saltwater fish that are displayed under freshwater lighting, in my experience, look absolutely amazing. And Benny from Benny's Aquarium is doing this with his Chihiros lighting. I've got some Chihiros over some of my saltwater fish, and I've got some Bioscape pendants with a lot of red over my Seaway tank. And the warm tones in the fins, the orange and the reds and the, Dasumius tank, for example, my red soldier fish. Have you ever seen a red soldier fish under blue light? It's amazing. So not so much iridescence, but I do feel like there's a long way to come when it comes to playing with light spectrum with saltwater fish. Obviously, there's a yin and yang when it comes to keeping saltwater fish and keeping coral. Ugly Man's Reefing, question for you. By the way, guys, I think we have to wrap up pretty soon. We're getting on pretty far. But so if you've got any questions that you haven't, that's been asking, you've been in your mind, pop them down below. But we'll just have a look at these. Question for you, Ugly Man's Reefing 1862. Question for you, do you have any info in regards to collecting licenses up in Queensland? Heard a while back the government was not giving out any new licenses anymore. Okay, so Ugly Man's Reefing. I'm assuming, mate, that you're talking about commercial licenses, because to collect your own aquarium fish for your own personal aquarium, you don't need a collecting license as long as you abide by size limits. So you can't collect a baby mangrove jack, for example. You stay out of the green zones and the protected zones. But in regards to the commercial licenses, as far as I'm aware, and I'm not really in with the commercial guys, but I have had a little bit of secondhand knowledge, is that no, they're not putting out any more commercial licenses. And that people that are collecting underneath the umbrella license of the license holder, the wholesaler, so to speak. Which I think is probably a good thing. All saltwater fish see in fluoro. I should try a Marucci River biotope with Besser blocks and a bench shopping trolley. Mate, I reckon that would look bloody awesome. I love Besser blocks in the aquarium. In fact, I was recommending to Kane, who I was talking to, about a Hull River biotope, which is outside of Tully, up where I used to live, North Queensland. And I was saying how I used to use Besser blocks, but the skinny ones, in my estuary aquarium, which is now my Saratoga tank. And they were on angles. They were covered by a lot by rocks, but there was a few exposed because it was meant to be a break wall environment that you'd see in a river mouth or something, and there were some trees leaning down. But the fish loved it. They loved getting in tight in those narrow, slim profile ones. The best natural sunlight light, in my opinion, is an LED fan light that has a 6.5 light spectrum. Panel lights can work too. Yeah, I don't know, Gab, because it's a funny thing. The 6,500 light spectrum is meant to be daylight. I bought some of those UFO LED lights that are meant to replace the old metal halides that go up in the shed industrial lighting type situation. They were LED vents, and you could select just a flat UFO. You could select between 4,000, which is warm, 5,000 being cool, even though it's not cool, and 6,500 being daylight, and you can select between 80, 100, and 120 watts. So I select 120 watt, 6,500 Kelvin. There's two of those over my Saratoga tank. And I think the one thing I'll say is that without the little bit of extra blue, they really show up tannins in the water from driftwood that leaches, or if your water just gets a bit stale, for want of a better term. That little bit of extra blue tends to give you a bit of leeway there. And I guess my thought comes back to when Aqua Design Amano was releasing their metal halide lights back in the day, and they had those 150 watt double-ended globes. They were 8,000 Kelvin, not 10,000, so it's somewhere in the middle, but they just gave that little bit of extra buffer against the yellows, so to speak. They were even on the slight green side, if you recall that. Thanks, Dingo Dave. Appreciate that, mate. Fish collecting 9149. He might be putting out a... Oh, that's right. You collected a coral beauty. I did see that come up. I haven't watched it yet, Steve. When are you putting out the next vids, Adam? I'll watch yours if you watch mine. Haha. All right. So Steve from Fish Collecting, jump on board and watch him. I do believe, I haven't seen it yet. I saw the thumbnail, that there's a coral beauty in the works. So you can check out that for a bit more fish collecting activity. Yep, blue lights hides the crack. Yeah, I know. It just gives you a bit of extra time, Gil. Next video, Steve, for me will be about, I'm editing one at the moment. It's about my purple groper or purple rock cod. All right, guys, we're going on an hour and a half here. I appreciate you guys jumping in and having a drink with me this evening or two. And I don't think we're going to save the world by discussing these things, but I do think that it just helps a little bit. And it might mean that if you're in an aquarium store one day, you might have a bit of a chat with some of the owners and just, discuss these kind of issues. And I don't know, it's one step forward maybe to having a hobby that's a bit more, I don't know, I feel like that hobby sometimes is under fire from people that don't understand keeping what we get from keeping fish in boxes. And I do feel like we need to try and strive to do things as, I don't know, as ethically as possible. So anyway, with that being said, thank you very much for coming on board. Cal, good night, guys. Gabs, thanks. Steve, Gil, Sing It Ding Dong. I'm not sure. I come lost track. Gold Coast Fish Keeper. Thanks very much for watching. And don't forget, if you are watching this on your YouTube in rerun and you have some questions that you want me to answer, pop them down in the comments section of this YouTube video and I'll answer at the start of next week's live stream. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Over and out. Now all I got to do is find the button that says end stream. Good night.